Hi, I'm Erik Hall, the digital sports editor at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and I'm joined by Glen Crevier, who was APSE president in 2005, 2006, while at the Minneapolis Star Tribune. Thanks for joining me, Glenn.
Thank you, Eric. Glad to be here.
So, how did you get involved with APSE?
Well, yeah, well, I have to go back to 1998 when I joined the Santa Rosa Press Democrat as a assistant sports editor, and we won an award. We were a small paper, a small upcoming newspaper, and we won an award, and our staff was just completely thrilled that we won a top 10 in daily that year. And then right after that, the sports editor Rick Vasek, who was a good friend and mentor of mine, left to go to the LA Daily News, and I succeeded him as sports editor. And at that point, I got involved. The paper started sending me to the conference every year. Back then, we called it a convention, and so I would go to that every year. And really, just one thing led to another. Quite honestly.
Quick side note, a lot of people have commented how it went from being a convention to a conference. Since you have been so involved in the conferences, do you know what led to that change?
No, I really don't.
Okay.
I think Mike Anastasi, when he was president, might have made the change, saying people don't call them conventions anymore. But I think we've all accepted it's now a conference, and that's what it is. That's what we call it.
All
That's
right.
how we advertise it.
What led to you becoming president of APSE?
Well, to be honest, I was very flattered. I was probably nominated in 2003. The first time I ran, I lost, and that happens with a lot of people. Sometimes it takes a couple of years, but I just got involved in as many things as I could. I got involved in the regions, and I just did as many things as I could to volunteer and help out. And I guess I just became well known. And then in 2000 and I don't know, two, three, or four, whatever year it was, Don Squire of the Boston Globe nominated me, and I won that year. And I was thrilled to win. It was a great honor for me. And I've been involved with APSE for almost 35 years, one way or another.
What were some significant challenges you faced during your tenure as APSC president and leadership of the organization?
Yeah. Well, when I became president, the hot raging debate was, should we allow .com organizations into APSE? At the time, we were just a group of newspapers and sports editors for print products. And so when I became president, I created the Futures Committee, and Jerry Mickle was the outgoing president, and I asked him to head up the Futures Committee. And their marching order was basically to investigate whether APSE should allow .com organizations into our organization. And at the time, there weren't too many. I think the two big ones were ESPN and Fox Sports. And so we came back a year later at the conference in Orlando, which would have been, I think, 2006, maybe. Oh, no, 2000. Yeah, 2000. No, we came back a year later in 2006 in Las Vegas. And this is going to sound funny, but we decided to vote both ESPN and Fox in as provisional members for 1 year. Now, think about that now, 18 years later or whatever. It's almost laughable, but at the time they were the two big .coms, and so we let them in as provisional members to see how they would do.
What do you think were some of your significant contributions to the organization during your time as president?
Yeah, well, I thought about that a little bit before we came on, and one of the interesting things I was going to say was that back then, unlike now, Ed Storin was the secretary treasurer of APSE. And I want to tell you, Ed ran APSE with an iron fist. Make no mistake about it. He ran the organization. And so when I became president, I mean, back then, Ed pretty much told you what you had to do. And one of the most important things I had to do was to revive the regions. This has been, as you know, an ongoing issue with APSE for many years. But at the time, we might have had 8 or 9 regions. I don't think any of them met the previous year. So one of my main goals was to get the regions back in order. And in fact, I may be the only APSE president who literally had to fire a region chair because he didn't do anything and he wouldn't schedule a meeting. So, I was proud to say at the end of my year that, yeah, hey, all the regions met. So that was one of the big things. Then, of course, clearly moving the .com issue forward was another thing. But when I became president, Ed Storin came up to me and said, well, I've decided I'm going to quit. This is my last year. I'm done. So I had to hire somebody to replace Ed. And so I got together with Tim Burke, who was at Palm Beach at the time. Yeah, it was at Palm Beach at the time. And we were sort of a committee of two, and we recruited people around the country. And ultimately, we found this guy named Jack Berninger that we interviewed and both fell in love with. He was just a terrific candidate. And obviously, the rest is history. Jack was become a legend in APSE. And I often joke to him that, Jack, you're the best hire I've ever made.
Could you talk more about like what do you mean by like you found Jack? That like surprises me that like he wasn't someone already involved with APSE just because he was so ingrained with APSE by the time I got involved.
Yeah, well, one of the things I would say is, APSE, when I went to APSE meetings, if Jack was going at the time, and I can't say whether he was or he wasn't, I just didn't know him. Back then we'd have attendances of 150 people. So you didn't really know everybody as intimately as you do now. And I had met him, but and then he had just recently retired. So at the time when Tim and I were looking, Jack was interested. People spoke very highly of him. And I really didn't get to know him until we went through the interview process. And, consequently and ultimately became, a really good friend of mine and also my mentor in this job I hold now as conference coordinator.
What I'm curious a little bit more about like the hiring of what were you looking for in that position, and what do you remember like about Jack made you think that he was the right person, and clearly he was.
Yeah, well, he was clearly organized. He clearly had the technological skills, but I think the fact that Jack was just kind of a low key, easygoing guy, very professional. I mean, there was nothing about him you didn't like, right? And so, as I remember, we had a couple other candidates, and Jack just stood out amongst the crowd. He was very enthusiastic. He really wanted to do it. He wanted to do it for the right reasons, and he was willing to make a commitment to doing it. And everything fell into place.
Um, you talked about also there firing a region chair. I'm just kind of curious, what was the process of that? Did you like have to like just like ask him to resign, and or was there
Yeah,
like
yeah,
a
yeah,
vote
yeah.
to vote him out?
Funny thing is, I couldn't tell you his name right now, but at the time, like I was just determined that every region was going to meet, and this person just, for whatever reason, I mean, let's face it, we all know as sports editors, we're so busy, it's hard to do some of the other things. But I had a strong belief that people who joined APSE leadership positions needed to make a commitment. If you're gonna join it, you're gonna step forward and be a region chair, then you have to follow through with that obligation. And if you didn't, there had to be consequences. And that's kind of why I had to make a change so that that region would meet.
Gotcha. Um, what so how did you balance being APSC president? Talking off that, how did you balance being APSC president and being sports editor of the Star Tribune?
Yeah, that's a good question. You looked for a little time here and there, maybe during the workday when you could get something done. But by and large, I think when you were in doing things with APSC, you were doing at that time, you were doing them. I was doing them at home at night and on the weekend. And, it was a little different back then. Like, I'll give you an example. The second vice president for APSE back then was in charge of producing. We really didn't have a website then. He or she was in charge of producing 6 printed magazines a year. We did 2 of them. That one previewed the convention, and one was a post-convention report, and the other 4 were basically theme-oriented magazines that dealt with profiles of people in journalism, good things that were happening, trends in the industry. And those were normally about 16 to 20 to 24 pages in length, and they were in color, and they were designed. They were really nice. They were printed, and they were mailed to the membership. So, that was the work you did your first year as an officer. And most of that, frankly, was done at home in the evenings and on the weekends.
Um, when you finished your presidency, um, you were remained quite involved in the organization. But then, what made you then take the step to decide to be the is conference chairman your title now?
Conference coordinator.
Coordinator.
Yeah, that's another good question. Well, I wanted to stay involved in some capacity. Jack and I, as I mentioned, became good friends. And he ultimately asked me one day, like, he said, "Hey, the timing might be right. Would you want to succeed me in this job? I'll be retiring in a couple of years." And the timing was almost perfect. I actually did the conference coordinator job for 1 year while I was still working, knowing that I would be retiring 2018 or 19. So I did the conference coordinating job for one year. So that's kind of pretty much how I got into it. And it's kept me involved in the organization, kept me involved with friends I have. I've made a lot of friends over the years in the organization. That was important. And I wasn't ready to totally step away from journalism. So I've enjoyed, the camaraderie that I still have. I enjoyed going to the conference and sitting in on some of the sessions. And, I enjoyed going to judging still and judging and just kind of staying involved. So,
What would you say are some important strategies that you have to put on the successful conventions and conferences? Sorry that you
yeah,
have.
well, I think one of them is one of the traits would be to be organized, and I hope I'm organized. I've done it now. This is my seventh or eighth one, so I have a routine for how we do it. And have a schedule for timetables and such. And it's the kind of thing where for a few months a year you're not doing too much, and then all of a sudden, like right now, it's like an avalanche trying to get ready for a conference that's less than a month away. So you get help from the outside. The president is very involved, to be honest, and so it's a team effort, and ultimately we hope it works. But as I tell the people at the hotels, I was a sports editor in my career, not an event planner. So bear with me, and if you have issues, let me know immediately, and I'll try to solve them for you. You learn a little bit of a few new things every year.
What are some of your favorite memories from conferences?
Oh boy, a lot of them are spending time with friends. I mean, over the years, you develop a good group of friends. Like, for me, I started off when I was a youngster in this business. I had a good friend from Sarasota named Scott Peterson, who was the sports editor. And, we just kind of get together and share stories and talk about problems. And then, you often, as anybody who attends these conferences knows, you leave with phone numbers and contacts and such. And that really has been the most helpful, I think, over the years. That's probably the best memory I have. I mean, I have always enjoyed going to sessions and learning and coming away with new ideas for things I could take back, whether I was working in Santa Rosa, Tacoma, Washington, or here in Minneapolis. I mean, you always came away with something you could try to do to implement into your section. I can remember many times at the conference going into the old newspaper room that we had. We don't even have that anymore. In fact, you go to an APSE conference now and you're lucky to even see anybody reading a newspaper. But I can remember going into that newspaper room and just thumbing through section after section and jotting down notes, or later taking photos on my iPhone of graphics or charts or just layouts that I really liked. And so those are really the valuable things that you get out of the conference.
Are there any particularly memorable over 35 years with the organization? I'm sure there's got to be some particular memorable cities or panels or speakers that stand out to you.
Yeah, boy, I don't know. They all run together at this point after so many years. I don't know that I can really answer that question.
All right.
I will say that if I could take it off of the conference for a second, one of the most memorable things I did in this organization, we talk about developing friends and such, was, I always enjoyed working with people who were up and coming like I was. I mean, when I was first in this organization, I wish we had more mentor situations. But when Bill Eichenberger left as president in like 2000, I don't know, three maybe, he started a program called the Sports Management Program or Sports Management Institute. It lasted a year or so. It didn't last long, but I got involved in that. I volunteered to help with that. And he assigned me a young sports editor named Mike Sherman. And so Mike and I talked on the phone. We got together. We talked a lot. We had him up here in Minneapolis. He spent a couple of days watching how we do business. And, Mike is just, such a sharp, impressive guy, and did such a nice job in Oklahoma when he was sports editor there, and then, later in Tampa. And, so he was one of the best friends that I developed from APSE. But, getting involved in that program, I wish that was something that we could have sustained over the years, because getting involved in that program, and at the conference, we used to do critiques of small newspapers. I used to get involved in that. I love doing that too, because, when I was young and up and coming, I was just, I wanted so much information. I wanted feedback. I wanted to get better. And so that's probably be one of my best memories.
What has the organization meant to you personally? You talked a little bit about the relationship with Mike and.
Well, I've been involved for 35 years. When I retired, I didn't walk away from it. So obviously it's meant a lot to me professionally. I want to see it continue to grow and continue to thrive. And I know we've had some tough years in the past few years. But, and I just made, some lifetime friends. I mean, even though, I'd say that, I don't see some of these people as much anymore. We try to get on the phone a couple of times a year, or it's always nice to see an email from someone like Scott Monserud pop into your email box and say, hey, I'm retiring, or whatever, just to have a conversation with them. So, it's been at various times, it's meant different things. Right now, it's still the camaraderie. I'm not obviously taking notes on ways to improve the sports section anymore because I'm not putting one out. But, but it's been a very important part of my life and my professional career and development. I mean, realistically, when I was in Santa Rosa in 1998, going to APSE in Boston, if you told me I would have been a sports editor for 20 years at one of the largest papers in the country, at a thriving professional sports market, I would have pinched myself. And I got the opportunity to do it. And I credit my years in APSE for what I've learned and how I developed and such for the success that I had in my career.
What advice do you have for future presidents and leaders of the organization?
Well, that's a good question too. I think there's always the business is changing so rapidly, and the organization is changing so rapidly. Sometimes it's hard to get our arms around what we're doing or where we're going because things are happening so fast. But I think one of the suggestions I would have for future presidents would be to have one or two agenda items that they want to accomplish, because the year when you're president goes by really quickly, and I think there's a tendency for everybody to just breathe a sigh of relief in mid-June or mid-July when the conference is over and go, whew, wow. And then the next thing you know, we're planning for the winter judging conference, and it's like, oh wow, I've got to start getting some things done. So what I would say is to have one or two agenda items and hit the ground running. Take a couple of weeks off, but then whatever you want to accomplish, get going, regardless what it is. It could be you want to improve the website, or you want to really make a focus on recruiting small newspapers. Or, one of my things, I question now whether APSE should still have regions. It's so hard to meet. I mean, you could probably do it electronically, but you have to make a commitment to doing it. I like the idea of having drive-in workshops that move around the country over the course of 2 or 3 years, kind of like what they're doing in the SEC now. Every 2 or 4 years, a team will be in each market. I'd like to see us move around a little bit. That to me would be a good challenge for a president. But I think whatever it is, I would say have your one or two items, articulate what they are, and then find a way to get them done. And like when the conference ends the next week, hit the ground running, because the year goes by very quickly.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about what you're doing now in your life.
Well, for the last month, I've been trying to put on a conference. Well, I'm retired. I still live in Minneapolis. And we have two children, one in New York City and one in outside of Portland, Oregon. So we travel there as much as we can to visit our kids. And I also like to work out. I do a lot of bicycling when I can here. This is a harsh climate, and I don't like to ride when it's below 50 degrees, which is most of the year. So in the winter, I try to go to Arizona. I pack my bike on the back of the car and drive down, do some biking down there. So do a lot of reading. I'm just really, kind of trying to enjoy myself. I worked hard in my career, and everybody says you have to have a purpose in retirement. Well, my purpose right now is just enjoying it day to day.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
I also want to take a moment to thank you. When I attended my first APSE summer conference in Chicago in 2012, you were my designated mentor. So
Okay, I remember
uh,
that.
I appreciate having you at least as a touchstone going there because I didn't know anybody going to my first
Yeah.
one. So I appreciate that. So,
Okay.
well, thanks so much for your time, Glenn.
Okay, Eric, thanks for having me.